Hey guys, Kakarot197 again, and today we're going to be doing a deep dive into the various theories that sprung up from a single line of dialogue that was said during the latest episode of Witch from Mercury. When talking with Suletta's mom, Belmeria Winston told her that there was no point in taking revenge for a 21-year-old, and then got cut off, leaving us to wonder what exactly this 21-year-old thing that she was talking about could be. And the most common thing that people are taking this as are the events from the prologue. But this then leads to a timeline inconsistency. In the prologue, Ericht Samia, also nicknamed Eri, just turned 4 years old, and up until now, it was assumed that Eri had her name changed to Suletta Mercury and was then sent to the Astacasia school as per the events of the mainline anime. But Suletta is officially 17 years old, meaning that there should have been a 13-year time gap and not a 21-year time gap. So suddenly, it looks like Suletta might not be Eri after all. And as far as the official support for this theory goes, silence can say more than anything else. While we do have an official year for the main anime, AS-122, no year is given for when the prologue takes place, nor do they say how long ago these events were. As for Suletta and Eri, they're also never said to be the same person. Eri has a character profile on the prologue section, and Suletta has a character profile on the main section. But again, at no point are the two ever connected. Suletta is simply described as a second-year student from the piloting department who was transferred there from Mercury. She's timid and lacks communication skills, and she's the pilot of the Gundam Ariel that was developed on Mercury. In fact, the only thing officially tying her to Eri is that she's the daughter of Prospera, who is Elnora Samia, who is the mother of Eri. And of course, it is this gray zone that leaves a lot of room for speculation, because no matter what, something is going on here. And the most prominent theory for the moment is that Eri isn't Suletta, but instead the Gundam Ariel. We don't know how this could have happened, but pilots being somehow absorbed by their machines isn't rare in the Gundam universe, which actually is really concerning now that I think about it. And we do get some hints that this very well could have been the case, but as you'll also soon see, they purposefully left everything vague and up for interpretation. For example, in the latest episode, Prospera says that she has no doubt that the Ariel will win because she has faith in her darling daughter. On the one hand, she could have faith in the piloting capabilities of Suletta, but on the other hand, she specifically says that the Ariel will win, so it's no stretch to say that the darling daughter she's talking about isn't Suletta, but Eri, who is inside of the Ariel. Not to mention that the Ariel is also talked about as a daughter of Prospera. Then, in both the intro and the official music video, we see young Eri being very connected to the Ariel, almost as if they're one and the same. However, if you read the official short story, which I will have linked down below in case you haven't, you'll know that Suletta basically grew up together with the Ariel as sisters. So it's also not crazy to have young Eri/Suletta hanging around the Ariel. Not to mention that with how the prologue and the main anime are two different things, it also just makes artistic sense to have both young Eri, the main character of the prologue, and older Eri/Suletta, the main character of the main anime, appear together. Think, for example, how Amuro and Char are sometimes depicted, going from Mobile Suit Gundam to Zeta Gundam to Char's counterattack. Next up, apparently the OS from the Ariel was changed from version 2.0 to version ES, supposedly meaning Eri Samia. But as with everything, this can be interpreted in two ways. The people running with the theory that Eri is the Ariel are saying that this means that Eri was definitely absorbed into the operating system, which is why it's now named after her, but it could also very well be that it just means that this version of the operating system was fine-tuned for Eri, and by extension Suletta, because she was the most compatible with it, back when it was just Lafrith and now when it's the Ariel. And finally, the, in my opinion, strongest possible indication is how Suletta isn't suffering from any drawbacks when using the Ariel. Despite what Prospera might be claiming, it's quite obvious to anyone that the Ariel is a Gundam and that the Gund arm system is being used here with the Gund bits. However, Suletta isn't suffering any of the negative effects that were associated with the system. Is it possible that Prospera is a genius and came up with a way to circumvent these negative side effects? Yes. And it's also very possible that that way was by having those negative side effects routed through a human that has been absorbed into the Ariel, or the Ariel, as some people have begun calling it. But that now leaves us with the next question. If we go with the assumption that the Eri from the prologue was absorbed into the Gundam Ariel, then who is Suletta? And well, the simplest explanation is that she's a clone of Eri, something that we'll get back to in a second. The second one then gets a bit darker and involves a similar fate as Elon. Instead of being a straight-up clone, she could have just been a random child that was kidnapped and then modified to look like Eri. Something that was even hinted at in the anime, with Belmeria wondering if her face was borrowed from someone else too. Another interesting possibility then, which would also be somewhat less dark, is that Suletta could actually be Eri's sister, and that their mom was pregnant during the prologue. However, even if we assume that she became pregnant shortly before the prologue, with the aforementioned 21-year time gap, this would still make Suletta 20 by the time of the anime. But at the same time, I don't think it's impossible for a 20-year-old to pose as a 17-year-old. Or, in typical calculating villain style, her mom could have lied to Suletta about her age because she knew exactly how everything was going to play out, and she needed her daughter to be 17 years old in the year AS122 for everything to go according to plan. Yes, a bit crazy, but I've seen crazier plot twists in anime. And if you want to get real dark then, in episode 5, during the fortune-telling scene, the stone representing siblings landed on 12. One of them is obviously Eri, who is now the Gundam Ariel, but then what about the other 11? Well, the Ariel has 11 Gund bits, who could each have the soul of a failed Eri clone. In episode 6, she calls them everyone, and it has also been pointed out that she seems to be very protective of the bits. In addition to that, this could also explain why Suletta was so good at controlling the Gund bits. Every one of them basically has a coprocessor in the form of another human soul. Another thing this would explain was the weirdness at the end of her battle with Elan, where the bits kinda dance around him in the shape of multiple, identical children. My one problem with this particular part of the theory, though, is that this is exceedingly dark, and it would also suggest that Suletta is somehow in on it, or at least aware of it, which doesn't seem to match Suletta's personality at all. The way she's characterized and the way she behaves makes me really doubt that she's aware that 11 failed clones are the funnels. And in the prologue, Eri and everyone else humanized the Lefrith, so I don't think it's that much of a stretch for Suletta to refer to the bits in a more human-like way. As for going out of her way to protect that single bit that was in danger of being destroyed, well, it is clearly in her best interest to keep all of her bits in the fight if she can, so saving that one bit was quite literally the best course of action, whether it was possessed by a human soul or not. As for the representation of the bits as children then, the only thing I can say to counter that is that maybe it was just a visual choice and it's just meant to represent Eri as being in control of all of those funnels. I really don't want this part of the theory to be true. All of that being said then, there can also be less nefarious explanations for the perceived time discrepancy. First of all, since we don't know what that 21 years refers to, it could refer to something completely different. A mobile suit isn't developed overnight, so it is very possible that 21 years ago was simply when the Lefrith first started development, or if it was 21 years ago that the first issues arose that would eventually lead to the events of the prologue. And another possibility that I've seen floating around is cryosleep. It's not shown that this kind of technology exists within the G-Witch universe, but it's not unreasonable either. While Suletta's mom was trying to figure out where to escape to, she might have put Eri into cryosleep and then woke her up later on. Although, this does become a bit more difficult to tie in with the official short story. And talking about the official short story, this is also the thing that makes me question the whole Eri is the Ariel the most. There are some things that do go along with the theory, but the novel is written from the viewpoint of the Ariel, and the overall feeling that I personally got from it was that the Ariel had its own consciousness, not influenced by a human being. And even after rereading it with this new theory in mind, it still didn't feel to me like the Ariel was Eri at all. Yes, the Ariel also calls Elnora/Prospera mother, but this can be very easily explained in the context of Elnora having created the machine, and again, the whole humanizing of the Gundams, be it the Lefrith or the Ariel. One thing then that I also saw popping up quite a bit in the comments of my Gundam news video where I brought up the theory was that maybe the time discrepancy had something to do with the difference between Earth years and Mercury years. But unfortunately, unless they go with a new style of Mercury year, Google told me that a Mercury year is 88 days, so that conversion doesn't add up. What Google did tell me though is that a Venus year lasts 225 days. So if the anime had been Witch from Venus, we could have concluded by saying that 21 Venus years are roughly equal to 13 Earth years. One thing I can say for certain though is that if Eri does end up being the Gundam, there's going to be one Gundam main character that'll be extremely jealous. So yeah, let me know down below what you think about this whole thing in the comments down below. Is Eri actually the Ariel, or is there something else going on? But that has been all for this theory video. As always, a big thank you to the Patreon supporters. I hope everyone watching has a great day, and I'll see you all next time.